All right, let me clear this whole stiff rod thing up. You're not going to have to get a doctor's appointment, I promise. But when you're swim jig fishing, okay, this is a 4-inch Z-Man diesel minnows, and you're swimming this in a power situation, because that's what we're talking about today, covering water with a power bait, a search bait, and a fish piles up behind it. And most of the time we're fishing depths from 1.5, 2 feet down to like 4 or 5 feet of water. And he starts to chase it. Once he overcomes the bait and he's coming at you, if the rod action that you're using is too forgiving and the reel is too slow, the gear ratio is just not right, or the pickup of inches per turn, let's say, is lower. That's if you're using a 2500 or maybe some 3000 size reels. You lose that fish, especially if it's a hard mouth fish like flounder or like redfish, or sometimes even snook, because the speed of the fish is so great. We've all lost that big Jack Crevalle doing this many times because they're so quick. So how do you beat that? Well, you still have to have that consideration of what species you're fishing for. How thick is the actual wire of the hook? Is it a heavy duty hook? Is it a medium wire hook? Is it a light wire hook? So there's 2 spinning rod setups that I like to use for what I would call swim jig fishing. Not like bass fishing, swim jig fishing, where the weights are extremely heavy, and you're pulsing the rod as you're swimming it, and you're really having to take a big swing. I'm talking about typical, you're fishing a mud flat, oyster flat, grass flat, and you're just covering water. You know the fish are there somewhere. You're working it. So here's a pic right here of 4 baits that I want to talk about. The 5-inch diesel minnow, the 4-inch diesel minnow, which is very popular this size, the 3-inch minnows, which is popular with a lot too because it catches a lot, and then something a little different, something that won at ICAST a couple of 2 years ago, and that is the Z-Man kicker crab. But all of them have one thing in common: you've got to have a fast enough reel. So let's first talk about more or less what I would call a trout setup. You're fishing over let's just say 2.5 to 5 feet of water for speckled trout. You're swimming a jig. Whether you're swimming, I'm gonna pull 2 down here real quick. I've got my table a little too low. Whether you're swimming a 3-inch paddle tail or a 4-inch paddle tail, you'll need to know this. These are a little bit lighter wire hooks. These are the trout eye hooks, and I picked an 1/8 and I picked a 1/4. So on something like that, I know I'm trout fishing, that's what I'm after. I'm probably going to pick a rod such as this. This is a 7.5 foot rod. It's a medium, moderate, fast. What the hell does that mean? Well, that means that this rod is going to have a more parabolic bend to it. You know, I can't show it to you in here as much, but it's going to have that length that's going to allow a long cast, and the power of the rod itself is medium, so it's going to throw anything from 1/4 to up to 3/4 of an ounce fairly well. Here's the trick. You've got to understand that by having that parabolic bend in the rod, you need to be using that medium to light wire hook. You can't use a heavy hook because it's going to have too much forgiveness to really get a good hook set. Now you do have 7.5 foot of rod here. So this is the all-purpose. This is in the Fitzgerald lineup. This is their all-purpose rod. And being that it is a medium spinning rod, it gives you that casting distance, but it gives you that forgiveness when you come tight. So you're going to be rolling this along, and I've got a twin power. This is a 3000 XG from Shimano. You're going to be rolling this along and a fish is going to hit it. You're going to lift and be reeling at the same time because you don't really need to strike them because they're coming at you. Reel, 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 and it's just loading nice and slow. It's going to give you that nice, smooth penetration into the trout's mouth without making a big hole in their face. It's one of my favorite trout rods that they make in their all-purpose lineup for Fitzgerald. But by having it paired with that Shimano Twin Power XD, and I know that's an expensive reel. I'm not saying you need to buy one. It's like I'm saying that you don't need to go see the doctor. But buy a 3000 size reel that has a good pickup speed. This one's extremely fast. It picks up maybe a little better than 37 inches per handle turn. That's a lot. That's a lot. That's what you're going to have, or just go to a 4000. But because this setup is so light and so balanced, I decided to go with the Twin Power XD on this setup to go with the Fitzgerald rod. It does a great job. Now I'm throwing it on 10-pound diamond braid. This is their light blue, and it's a limp enough line where it gives me some very, very long casts. So I can throw jigs, especially jigs such as, this is an 1/8 ounce head. So many of you that talk and add to the comments love throwing 1/8 ounce jig heads. This is the Trout Eye jig head. And then you have the body, the 3-inch minnow body. This happens to be the fried bologna. Does this jig weigh 1/8 of an ounce? No, it does not. Because once you peg that soft Elastec bait on it, now it goes from being an 1/8 ounce to likely being somewhere between 3/16 and a quarter, which fits nicely into the casting load of this particular rod. It's got that nice, sharp, clean jig, and you can get, a lot of trout action off a rod like that. So, what if you're fishing for redfish? I wouldn't normally pick up that other rod if I was doing that. If I was just fishing for redfish, and I knew I was fishing for redfish, let's just say I'm fishing the mouth of a creek that's got some oyster bars and things like that, and I know there's the possibility even of flounder being there on the outgoing tide, and I want something where possibly I could catch a big fish. This is November right now, so we have a lot of the big snook that have transitioned on our outside points and islands where I live here on the west coast of Florida, and they've transitioned into these creeks and into these creek mouths. So I have a possibility on any given day of catching a big fish. And I want to throw something a little larger. And for those of you that have fished with me, I fish a lot of casting gear, so I throw a lot of baits this big. This is a 5-inch diesel minnow. This is in the Cisco color, which is a really good looking, it looks just like a bait fish in the water. That's a heavy bait. I've got it on a 3/8. This is a redfish eye, goes back a little further into the bait. Still has plenty of action on a 5-inch bait. And with that tail on there, that 5-inch diesel, this probably comes closer to weighing a 1/2 ounce. So I can send it. I can cast this a long way. But if I were to cast this a long way on this parabolic rod action, my rod would not be stiff enough. It wouldn't. So my rod would not be stiff enough. So here's the rod we're going to use. And why am I saying that? I'm saying that not because I can't cast this on the all-purpose medium, moderate, fast. I can cast it. I can get it out there. But when that fish eats this bait, especially a hardmouth fish like a flounder or a redfish, I'm not going to be able to drive that heavy wire hook on that redfish eye into its mouth very well. So he's going to pull around on that rod, and unless he's hooked just right, it's going to come off and I'm going to lose the fish. So taking something that I've learned over the years, lots of years, I'm going to take a faster action rod. So here's what I have. This is a medium heavy 7'2" rod. Cast bigger baits much easier. It'll throw everything from 3/8 probably up to about 1 ounce with this. So it's a stick, if you will. I paired it up with a 4000 Shimano Strata. This is the FM, the new FM. I haven't even spooled it up yet. I pulled all the diamond stuff out and I was going to spool it. And I'll spool this up with probably 15-pound braid, because in this case, I'm not looking so much for distance as I am for strength. So this 7'2" rod is a fast action. You can tell when they're fast action because you'll see how all the eyes are close to the end here. They're not spread out as far. So it only bends in that tip. So it is a faster action rod. That quick to get back to normal faster action allows me to drive a bigger hook with a bigger bait tail into the fish, and I'm not going to lose that snook. I'm not going to lose that flounder. I've got power here. And in this case, with this particular rod setup, I can really pick up the line as fast as I want, because this, like I said, this Shimano will pick up 40 inches of line per handle turn. So even if I'm throwing it down the cane line or the sawgrass line and I'm just reeling, soon as I feel that fish coming up on it and I'm trying to catch up to him and lifting, I can stab him and make sure I get that great hook penetration. The other big advantage to using a faster reel and a rod that has a fast action, not the moderate fast that the medium rod has, is that's why I put that crab in our conversation. I've got this rigged on a snake lock, so it's Texas rigged. This is a 1/4, but with everything on it, it probably weighs closer to 3/8. With the crabs, with the Z-Man Kicker crab, I like to work, let me set this down before I Bill Dance this whole thing. I like to work this crab along the bottom, and this arm sticks up like in a defensive posture. So I'm just working it along the bottom. That's why I like to rig these a little heavier. But that dragging motion where I'm dragging it and taking half a turn and dragging it in the muddy creek and taking half a turn on the spinning reel, dragging it, take half spin. When I get a pickup, the fish goes, thump, I know it's a flounder. I've got to be able to reel down, get the slack out, and stab him. And this rod has a great action for driving hooks through plastic, no matter what. And I'll pin him so good he's not getting off. So that's the reason why when you're swim jigging on inshore saltwater flats, it's important to understand that you can't have just one rod. You got to have two. Now let me tell you about this particular rod, the specs. So let me tell you about this particular rod, the specs on it. This is an Aqua Dream Special. This is from Fitzgerald rods. These rods, there's a few of them in this lineup. They were designed by Captain Mike Hackala. Now, Mike and I have been friends for a long time. Believe it or not, he was probably the first real sponsor I ever had. That's a history lesson there. And that was way back in the 90s, early 90s. I used to go to Mosquito Lagoon and I used to fish a lot of his spoons, which I still do today, and his flats candies. And I was just, a young tournament guy, and he saw some potential and he started sponsoring me. And that's how it all got going. So when Mike designed the rods, there's no one that knows redfish like Mike Hackala. So I knew it was going to be a good rod. Now, when you look at the specs on this rod, it's a 7'2" medium heavy, fast tip. It is a 3/8 all the way to 3/4 ounce rod to throw baits. I'm telling you right now, it's heavy enough to throw a 1 ounce bait. So if you wanted to throw something a little bit outside the 3/4 range, you could with this rod. It's one of probably my favorite rod in this setup that he has. He has another Aqua Dream. We're going to talk about that when I do a video on suspending baits that I like a lot for treble hook lures. But for jigging, for a jig rod, this thing is the bomb. It really is. And it does a fantastic job whether you're a snook guy, on the flats, a redfish guy, a flounder guy, or, you know, just any of those species, black drum and whatnot, that you have the opportunity and you need that little bit of extra lifting power and hit 'em power, he makes a rod for it. So guys at Fitzgerald did a really good job putting that together, and there's some components that Fitzgerald utilizes in a proprietary blank that I will do a video on later, but I just wanted to share that with you guys.